Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here once again, and I am doing a follow-up to the topic of last night's video, which was about the firestorm that is now brewing, though yesterday it was just sort of getting started, with regards to senior editor of Reason magazine, which is a very unreasonable outlet, Katherine Mangu-Ward. In my previous commentary, I mentioned the fact that I believe that Katherine Mangu-Ward is an attention whore who's looking to get her face on the mainstream media, and that is it. I don't see any serious intellectual credentials anywhere, at least not in terms of her actual performance. She might have a degree in something, probably something useless like women's studies or some other crap like that, but when it comes to actual, practical, libertarian outcomes, she has none. Never been in elective office, never written anything worth a damn. The titles of the articles that she's written on Reason magazine are hideous, and the topics mundane to downright frivolous. The fact that Reason regularly promotes this woman by having her going on to all of these different news outlets and giving her meaningless opinions is revolting, but perhaps not all too unexpected. I had also stated in my previous video that I believe that Reason magazine is not a worthwhile libertarian news outlet. In fact, I would argue it's not libertarian at all, unless you consider the Fox pseudo-libertarianism of people like Neil Bortz to actually be representative of the liberty movement, which I would argue it's not. And I know I'm pissing off a few people by saying that, but I'm sorry. You cannot support nation building in Iraq and call yourself a libertarian. All right, that's like saying I'm a duck, but I don't have any feathers, and I don't even have a beak. Anyway. So, I did hold a little bit of hope out, though, somewhat, though, that maybe some of the more established people, the more level-headed people like Nick Gillespie, would maybe come to their senses and try and do some damage control here after this fiasco. Unfortunately, by evidence of the article posted today at Reason, my hopes were wholly unjustified, and I am about to go through and I'm going to fisk this pathetic excuse for an article, and then I'm going to sum up my thoughts on the matter completely. Reason staffers Mike Riggs and Katherine Mangu-Ward were on the television yesterday to discuss the media's response to what might be called the riddle of Ron Paul. Oh, it's no longer the Ron Paul delusion, now it's the riddle of Ron Paul. Nice job switching gears there, Nick. Continuing. Why do major newspapers, broadcast shows, and cable news outlets seem hell-bent on ignoring a 12-term GOP congressman who came in a tight second in the Iowa straw poll? I don't know. Maybe because they're not as ambitious as you and are not getting into writing hit pieces, which you guys have been doing. Continuing. Indeed, the results of that hokey quadrennial exercise in corn dog politics was used to talk up Michelle Bachmann's legitimacy. Oh, I love this. So the straw poll has no legitimacy whatsoever. So you're saying that both Bachmann and Paul are not really legitimate, as if that makes what you did any better. Continuing. Yet none of this seemed to rub off on Representative Paul, who seems to be getting the Voldemort treatment from just about everyone with the exception of Jon Stewart, and you guys also. First up is Associate Editor Mike Riggs talking to Tom Hartman's show on Russia Today. I've provided a link in the description for this video. Please go and watch it. While poo-pooing Hartman's conspiracist take on the matter, the left-wing host suggests that media outlets tightly controlled by interlocking boards of directors have put the kibosh on covering Paul. Riggs agrees that Paul is not getting the respect and credibility he deserves. Well, duh, everybody knows that now. Where'd you park the squad car, Dick Tracy? Continuing. Paul says Riggs has been a consistent opponent of promiscuously interventionist foreign policy since the early days of Afghanistan. The country says Riggs is done with war, including the new one that President Obama plunged into in Libya without so much as a congressional by your leave. And Paul is the only candidate apart from former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson, an enormously undercovered political candidate, in my opinion. I concur with you on that much. Who was also unambiguously against the budget-busting excesses of the GOP Congress and Bush White House back in the day. That very consistency, says Riggs, runs afoul of GOP kingmakers who give the mainstream media its cues and talking points. Mostly, I think it's a lazy mainstream media. If the consultant or the guest I have on my show 3 times a week says Ron Paul isn't worth paying attention to, then I'm not going to devote any coverage to him. Let me educate you about something, Mr. Riggs. What matters in any business where you have advertising involved is ratings. And Ron Paul brings in people that are not part of your established audience. He does get interviews on a regular basis, and when he does, there is a noticeable bump in the viewership of these shows, some of which are worth a damn, others are jokes. But this notion that consultants from party kingmakers alone make these decisions, that may be true in the case of Fox News, although not completely if you consider the fact that they've canned a couple of people that were somewhat well liked by the GOP establishment, such as Glenn Beck. I think he was reasonably liked. I don't think he was completely liked, but he was more liked than Ron Paul probably. Anyway, continuing on. The GOP establishment, who tried to kneecap Paul's return to Congress in 1996 by throwing support behind a different primary candidate, rightly worries that Paul will split votes and show up the disturbing lack of consistency in folks such as Mitt Romney, who is fast becoming the India rubber man of electoral politics. This wouldn't happen if these party elites would give the guy the nomination and let 2 + 2 = 4 command the platform of the GOP, which apparently not only them but also Reason magazine has no interest in doing whatsoever. Anyway, continuing. As Matt Welch and I note in our new book, The Declaration of Independence, How Libertarian Politics Can Fix What's Wrong with America, only 38% of folks who voted for Ron Paul in 2008 primaries went on to vote for John McCain in the general election. Indeed, between 1992 and 2008, only 46% of self-identified libertarians voted for the GOP presidential candidate. Between 1972 and 1988, the percentage clocked in at 69%. That's a noticeable decrease, and I think it has something to do with the Bushes. Continuing. Ron Paul articulates many of the differences between libertarian principles and how the supposed small government pro-capitalist Republican Party has chosen to govern. Of course, candidates such as Ron Paul and Gary Johnson discomfort the GOP establishment. They not only show how actual electable Republicans could choose to talk and govern, they show how compromised most GOP candidates are when it comes to truly believing in small government. This is all fairly well and good for general abstract principles of small government and liberty and foreign policy. However, when you look at the actual interview on Russia Today, you find a lot more to like in what Mr. Tom Hartman is saying than you do with his useless libertarian guest. And with regards to some of the things that he said, I'm just going to say something right now. Being a principled non-voter does not impress me at all. We have over 100 political parties in this country. Now, only a handful of them get on the ballot. But if you do a little bit of research, you can find somebody that gets dang near close to covering all the bases that you want covered. And you can make a principled write-in vote. As far as I'm concerned, the only excuse for not voting on principle grounds is if you have a religious covenant, and as far as I know, the only valid one would be the covenant of the Westminster Confession and the Reformed Church of Scotland, that tells you that you cannot support a government that does not recognize Christianity as the official religion of the country. I can understand that. You're not prevented from commenting in politics if that's your viewpoint, but your opinions on these politicians would be hypothetical because they are violating your principle of taking oaths to serve in an illegitimate government. But that's another issue altogether. In other words, I don't believe for a second that Mr. Riggs's principled non-voting status has to do with anything other than the smug little highbrowed intellectualism that's all too common at Reason magazine. One of my chief criticisms of this particular news outlet is that they have no practical solutions to the problems of statism. Frankly, I don't think they're interested in actually solving the problem. I think they're interested in writing books, making witty little one-liners describing how much the government sucks, and bringing in the bacon with whatever opportunities they can get into in the world of venture crony capitalism. Picking up endorsements from big business tycoons who maybe like to dabble in Republican politics under the guise of libertarianism. Moving on to the next portion of the article, this deals with the debacle with Katherine Mangu-Ward on Fox Business News. Mangu-Ward provocatively states, "I think Ron Paul is getting a tremendous amount of coverage for someone who is never going to be president." Additionally, she says that everyone, including Paul and his campaigners, know that. She continues that Paul is bringing some great overlooked issues into the debate and wonders more why Representative Bachmann is taken seriously rather than Paul marginalized. As one might imagine, such plain speaking, and outright fallacious plain speaking, I might add, has brought down upon Mangu-Ward and Reason a Texas cyclone-sized storm of email questioning our libertarian bona fides, moral certitude, and strangely personal hygiene habits. While I cannot speak for the latter, I can say to you with full confidence, Mr. Gillespie, that you have no libertarian bona fides whatsoever. As far as I'm concerned, you guys are a bunch of idiots who dabble with libertarianism on the weekend and use it as a way to sell books and to rope in endorsements. Excuse me. Anyway, continuing on. We fielded more than a couple demands that Mangu-Ward be fired for her remarks, which seems to be a strange request of an organization that trades in free minds and free markets. All right, I'm stopping right here, right now. I have had it with this. I get extremely frustrated with people that say, free speech this, free speech that, free speech, free minds. Shut up. That crap goes without saying. There is a fundamental problem with the logic that's going on in Mr. Gillespie's article here. And I'm just going to break this down for all of you right now because this is a pervasive problem within weekend warrior libertarians and people who don't deal in the philosophical nuances of the concept of liberty. Liberty and freedom is not a pact to destroy liberty and freedom. There are ways that you can undermine your own freedom by a certain chosen course of action or by chosen speech. You can heap praise upon such wondrous figures as Joseph Stalin, Antonin Mussolini, and you can defend it on the grounds of free speech. Let me ask you something, though. What happens when that speech and those endorsements are used to get those people into elected office where they can further degrade and ultimately destroy what little freedoms we still enjoy? Better still, what does it say about an ideologue when they use the rhetoric of a given mode of thought to undermine that mode of thought at every single turn? Free speech is a double-edged sword, and if you're not careful about how you choose what you say and also what you do in the broader context of liberty, you will end up impaling yourself or you'll end up running through somebody that's on your own damn team. I'm tired of hearing about people saying, it's my right to free speech. Of course it's your right to say it. And it's my right to tell you that you're dead wrong. And as far as I'm concerned, you should shut the F up. And as far as free markets, I'm sorry. No, that's not what's going on here. When you're taking money from corporations, and this news outlet does, that support regulations that create barriers to entry, I'm sorry, you're not in the business of free markets. Not unless you make a full disclosure of where it is you disagree with these companies and that you're taking their money on a contingency that they're not pulling your strings afterwards. And even then, that's extremely dubious. I would never do that. Free minds to destroy freedom of thought, and free markets to destroy the freedom of the marketplace. That is what's on display here. Undermining any chance of conserving and maybe expanding upon the liberties of what we have is not freedom of speech. It is choosing to use freedom of speech to destroy it along with the other freedoms. You're not getting a pass from me on this by arguing this stupid platitude. Anyway, back to the article. Reason staffers disagree on a wide range of topics, including the current issues of whether and why Ron Paul is getting the coverage he deserves and just how likely he is to win the GOP presidential nod, much less win the general election of 2012. These are conversations worth having, but they are not the stuff of vendetta. You know something? I'm going to tell you something right now. This is something that needs to be said about every news outlet, not just Reason. These conversations are not worth having. As a news outlet, your role is to report the news, not to tell people how to think about it. And almost every single news outlet is guilty of this in varying respects. When you write articles, even when you disclose that you're a commentator and a pundit, not a journalist, you are still leading people down a particular train of thought with your words. And when you say that somebody has no chance of winning, you are making a self-fulfilling prophecy become a reality. People read your articles, they hear you say that you're libertarians, they believe both, and then as a result, what you say is definitely going to happen, happens. And it happened in part because of you. If you want to do something, Reason Magazine, you can shut up about who's likely to be the nominee, and you can start reporting the facts. Stand out from the crowd, because right now all you are is mainstream media to me. All right, back to the article. InTrade, the site that makes crowdsourced predictions about political events, supports Mangu-Ward's premise, pessimism when it comes to Ron Paul's electability. I don't care about what InTrade says. It's a group of people who crunch numbers. It has nothing to do with the way that human beings act and interact in the world at large. You want to call yourself a libertarian? I suggest picking up a copy of Ludwig von Mises's Human Acts. Get educated. Because right now, Nick Gillespie is showing me that you don't know jack shit when it comes to libertarianism. Continuing. Right now, InTrade figures that Texas Governor Rick Perry has a 37% chance of being the GOP nominee, followed by former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney at 30%. Just a few days after Iowa, Bachmann gets a meager 5.3% shot at being the nominee, and Paul shows up at 3.2% over Real Clear Politics. Paul is pulling in less than 9% of aggregated polls behind Romney, Perry, Palin, and Bachmann. Palin is not even running yet. This is so meaningless. All right, continuing. That can't be heartening to Ron Paul supporters for sure, but fretting over electoral probabilities misses, in my opinion, the far more important point raised both by Ron Paul's candidacy and the studied non-responses to it. Paul is saying things that are widely resonant with the American public and that are equally wildly out of step with established polls and media types. This is a guy who managed to storm the New York Times bestseller list with books about the founding of the country and ending the Federal Reserve, after all. Yeah, the same one that your own article, an article put on this magazine called them dumb little books with no actual thoughtfulness to them whatsoever. Read your own damn articles, Nick Gillespie, Mr. Senior Editor. Continuing. Virtually alone amongst members of Congress, much less members of his party, he opposed the warfare state from his first days in office. He was against the TARP and the bailouts, against Bush and Obama's stimulus spending, has brought new scrutiny to the nation's central bank. But that's not stopping you and from the rest of the people at Reason from throwing him under the bus. Continuing. Which helps explain why Paul is, for too many partisans and people and press people alike, a tough to tangle with. To engage the issues that he raises would require too much recalibration for most Republicans and a total brain transplant for most Democrats and members of the press who aren't ideological as much as they are fundamentally unserious. All right, stop right here. I often get frustrated with establishment Republicans and Democrats, and I make comments that I later think twice about with regards to their intelligence level. But I'm going to tell you something right now. This kind of language does not win them over. And again, self-fulfilling prophecy right here. Nick Gillespie is coming off as a self-centered, self-important, high-browed, jackass elitist. This is the reason why libertarianism gets nowhere in this country. And the reason why Ron Paul is making waves is because he doesn't come off this way. This is what I was talking about in my previous video when I say we have a problem with prima donnas in the libertarian movement. You know, Mangu-Ward's going around saying, oh, look at me, Ron Paul can't win. Nick Gillespie comes along and say, you know something, it's a shame that Ron Paul can't win. Look at me in my flashy black leather jacket. I'm total hot shit, aren't I? All right, continuing on. That's a damn shame, but it's one that is surely on the decline. Ron Paul may not be getting the coverage he deserves, but he's getting more of it than he did the last time around, and as the serious issues he pushes become ever more central to what voters care about, his ideas and views will be right at the center of the moment, regardless of whether he wins shows or places in New Hampshire and beyond. That is the real story, and it's one that won't be going away despite the best efforts of establishment types who wish otherwise, including you and your magazine, Mr. Gillespie. And that's the end of the article. All right. Now to sum up. Reason Magazine is not a libertarian magazine. They can call themselves that if they want to, just like Glenn Beck can call himself a libertarian if he wants to. I'm not buying it. I don't believe it. I don't recognize it as being such. Nick Gillespie essentially tried to straddle a fence here by trying to defend his staff, the people that he works with, and also to placate the people that are angry at him. And in doing so, he was condescending the whole time. That article was maybe slightly less offensive than the Ron Paul delusion article. I'm sorry, I'm not letting anybody off with this free speech nonsense, all right? You have the right not to be thrown out of the country, deported the way Woodrow Wilson wanted to, with some political dissenters in his day. You have the right not to be imprisoned for the things you say, and you definitely have the right to not be killed by the government for the things that you say. This is not about killing anybody, arresting anybody, or deporting anybody. This is about political rhetoric and its consequences. Your freedom to make choices does not set you free from the ramifications and consequences of those choices. Katherine Mangu-Ward chose to conduct herself like a normal, everyday neocon and or new leftist shill for the mainstream media. And if you want my personal opinion, that's where he belongs. Get her a slot on MSNBC. She doesn't belong anywhere calling herself a libertarian. Chairman Mao is probably more libertarian than this bitch is. This is the stuff that you have to deal with. This is the reason why when you have dissension in the ranks, and if it's on something as important as the very identity of the movement, you have to come down hard on these people. And if necessary, you have to separate yourself from them. You have to become your own faction. Reason Magazine, as far as I'm concerned, is not at bat for anything, be it freedom of thought or free markets. It's just another corporately owned piece of trash that isn't worth the paper it's printed on. This is going to sum up my thoughts on this matter. As far as I'm concerned, Reason TV, Reason Magazine, the whole shaboodie is dead to me. They're neocons, or they're socialists. Call them what you want. They're not libertarians. That does it for me. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.